Hey everybody, Chris with Up North Airgunner. So really quick legislative update here in the state of Michigan on the House Bill 4080. And what this bill does is it actually does two things. One, the bill basically identifies or acknowledges arrows and bolts that can be fired from a airgun based or a pneumatic device, basically. So the second part of this bill, what it does is it actually writes into Michigan state law that this device would be able to be used by disabled hunters. Very similar to how here in the state of Michigan, we have something called the standing vehicle permit, where based on medical conditions, you can apply for this permit to be able to hunt from a standing vehicle. So basically what this bill does is it kind of follows that same process of being able to apply for that permit, and that is just for the archery season, which is October 1st through November 14th. And by legalizing, though, this projectile in a more broad sense would then also open up its use in all firearm seasons. So that means it could be used for, let's say, turkey season in the spring and the fall. So that would be available for all hunters. The reason why I'm making this video, one, I'm going to show you the entire testimony that happened yesterday in the Michigan House of Representatives. And this is the Natural Resources Committee that basically hears testimony and they basically vote it to then go to the House floor for a vote where it gets voted on. And then if it passes the House, then it goes into a Senate committee. And then the Senate committee gets to hear testimony. And if it passes, then it goes to the Senate floor. Then it gets voted on. And then it goes to the governor's desk. Well, last year we made it through that entire process and it got vetoed by the governor. The reason why I think it's really important for all of you to watch this is that no matter what state you live in, you really need to be aware of how hunting regulations and laws are established. Because I will tell you what, I mean, it's hand-to-hand combat a lot of times. And unfortunately, I know a lot of times we get all up in arms about anti-hunters and anti-gun and anti-Second Amendment folks. Quite honestly, our worst enemy is ourselves. We as hunters, because we are so passionate about our flavor of hunting or our type of activity in the woods that we hold so passionate, we basically end up screwing a lot of other hunters. And so my position on this whole thing, and quite honest, is about open access. I really don't care what somebody wants to bring into the woods as long as it's ethical. And really, quite honestly, that first part of this bill about making this legal for disabled hunters and for me, disabled veterans, being able to make sure they have all the abilities to use devices like this as an adaptive device to make things safer and easier for them in the woods. Dude, it doesn't matter. I mean, you could be literally the most purest archery, you whittle your bow and arrows and flint to bring what you're going to bring into the woods. Man, that's awesome. Dude, I literally think that is probably one of the coolest things, and that is huge dedication. But how you want to perform your time in the woods as a hunter, if that's going to negatively affect somebody who served for your rights overseas and lost an arm, a leg, is in a wheelchair, and cannot walk, you and I are going to have some issues with each other, and we need to have a sidebar conversation. So if you're really interested in the whole sausage making process about how hunting laws and regulations are established in your state, make sure you check out your wildlife agency, how it happens there. But here in Michigan, this is how we do things. I think it's really important for you all to watch this just to see how it all kind of goes down and how testimonies work. So that way, if you do happen to go through this in your own state, you're kind of prepared of what that process looks like. So yes, this is going to be long, it's going to be drawn out, and so goes the legislative process, but I promise you, it's going to be worth your time. And yes, I was wearing hunting camouflage during the entire testimony. And yes, during an official government testimony, I was able to talk about Lewis and Clark and unicorn farts. So check it out.
Next, we have our own Representative LaFave, who has House Bill 4080 about pneumatic air bows. So, for the new members of the committee, you're about to get a new presentation. For some of us who have been on the committee, we have some background already.
Permission to speak to the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Please do, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, honorable members of the committee. I'm here to testify on behalf of House Bill 4080. It's a reintroduction of a bill that I've been working on. This is now my third time. Through the course of the last 5 years, the Committee on Natural Resources has passed it out 3 times. We've gotten it to the governor's desk once, where the governor promptly vetoed it. I'm here today to try to get this thing across the finish line. And the reason why I'm working so hard on this bill is that the only thing it does is it helps people with disabilities be able to go hunt in the woods. With the permission of the chair, I'd like to show the members of the committee how difficult it is for somebody with an upper limb disability to use a crossbow.
Please do.
So what we have here is a standard crossbow that is permitted to be used about 93 days during hunting season for the purposes of deer hunting. Now, how a crossbow works is you take this giant string and you pull it all the way back to here, and it gets clipped in and held until the trigger is pulled. In addition to that, you need to put a bolt in there. Now, I've got 2 hands, but they don't all work perfectly well. One of them is just fine, the other one's not. But to pull back a crossbow, you need 2 hands. Now, if you hold it with the left, you can pull on it with the right. That is fine and dandy if you can hold it with your left arm. Alternatively, they have newer crossbows, which is one that I use that has a built-in crank mechanism. It comes down, it grabs onto here, and you gotta wrestle this crank, holding the bow firmly with one hand and cranking with the other. Now, as you might imagine, as somebody who's got a good use of one arm, I shoot a crossbow with my right trigger finger. What that means is I got to switch hands. Now, anybody that is a firearms expert will tell you that's one of the most dangerous things you can do. But I can do it. The bill's not for me. It's for people with less than one arm. If you've only got one arm, there's no way you can crank this crossbow. It's not possible. However, we have a solution. Trade with me here, Tom. Thank you very much. And just for the benefit of all members, these weapons are completely impossible to be used other than a blunt instrument at this time. There's no CO2, there's no arrows in them. But with this weapon here, you can set it down on a table. These are what are called pneumatic bows. And so what you can do is you can pick up your CO2 canister, set it down, take the hose, plug it in here, press the button. Now this thing is primed. It's cocked, if you will. Then you take the bolt, you put it in. I'm not putting it in just for members' safety, but you put it in there. And here is the cocking mechanism here. With one hand, you can cock this thing. Now you're good to go. Now you have a one-handed weapon that can be aimed, it can be loaded, and it can be fired all with one hand. Something that is impossible to do with crossbows. Which is why I've been fighting so hard for this bill. So to get a permit under the bill, you need to have a physician check the box describing your permanent disability that qualifies you for it. There was concerns from the governor's office that there'd be so many disabled people using this that they would overcrowd the roads and cause more damage to trails. And these are my words, not hers. We need to continue to discriminate against people with disabilities because we don't want the roads to get bad. We got some numbers from the department. In 2020, the state of Michigan issued a total of 534 standing vehicle permits. The same year, over 611,000 people got licensed to hunt deer in the state of Michigan. That's roughly 0.00087% of the hunting population that would be eligible in the state of Michigan. And that's, of course, assuming that everybody with a upper limb disability has a lower limb disability that qualifies them for a standing from a vehicle permit. I qualify for a hunting from a standing vehicle permit. I may not even qualify for this particular permit because of the way that I had it drafted. Now, let's think about the folks that are going to be able to take advantage of this. These are individuals, many of whom have served our country overseas, fighting for our freedom, and had a horrific incident where an insurgent or otherwise terrorist planted a roadside bomb and blew off one of their arms and or legs. A lot of these individuals enjoy hunting, as do I, and I think that they should not be discriminated against by the state of Michigan for their service and sacrifice to our nation. In addition, bow season is during October, where in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, there usually isn't snow on the ground. If you are an individual bound to a wheelchair who also has an upper limb disability, in firearm season, which is November 15th through the end of November, oftentimes there is deep snow on the ground. I have not used wheelchairs very often in my life, as I have a prosthetic that I use pretty effectively, I think. But I've done some research, and it turns out they don't work very well in the snow. So why wouldn't we let people with disabilities hunt during bow season, which is where everybody else that doesn't want to use a firearm hunts? So those without disabilities can deer hunt for over 3 months out of the year in the state of Michigan, Mr. Chairman, but people with upper limb disabilities that can't use a crossbow or bow are discriminated against by the legislature, the governor, the DNR, and forced to only be able to hunt 20 days out of the year. It raises an issue. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, Article 2, Subtitle A, it's against the law to discriminate on the basis of disability in all service programs and activities provided to the public by state and local government. I also have with me testifying virtually Chris Turek, who is incredibly knowledgeable on airbows and has been involved in the process for a very long time. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my prepared remarks, and I'm happy to answer any questions of the honorable committee members if there are any.
Very good. Representative Wakeman has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, my colleague. Simple question, thought in my mind is, we've heard testimony in this committee this term, previous term, about the fewer and fewer members or individuals who are getting out into the woods and doing hunting. Okay, the department, MUCC, and others. Not to say that I'm speaking for them or I'm asking you to speak for them, but we've heard testimony in the past about what can we do to encourage participation. Give me your words on how you think this would help that scenario.
Well, we've got a much bigger problem than 524 hunters, Representative, but we have individuals, especially when they're getting a little bit older, you know, maybe like me, for example, I can finagle this crossbow and get it done. And let's be honest, I'm pretty darn good with that thing after I've used it for a while. But eventually I know that my body's going to fail, and that's not going to be possible for me when I get a little bit older. And that's going to happen, I hope. But these individuals that want to be able to use this want to be able to get out in the woods. They want to be able to hunt. They just don't want to do it when there's 3 feet of snow on the ground because they want to go bow hunting with their family. Actually, the reason why I introduced this bill is I had a constituent from the county of Menominee, and she has MS and unfortunately half a dozen other things that make it hard for her to use a firearm and impossible to use a bow and a crossbow. Her entire family's been bow hunting her entire life. That's when they go to deer camp. But she can't hunt with them because she can't use a crossbow or a bow and arrow. We need her in the woods. We need young people who just got done with their service to be able to go into the woods. And frankly, we need younger people than me. It turns out there are people younger than me out there that are eligible to hunt. It's hard to believe, but there are. We want the 16-year-olds, the 14-year-olds, the 18-year-olds to get in the woods as well. And that was another component of this bill that I thought made a lot of sense. If your mom or your dad, who's the hunter of the family, has one of these devices for their disability, I thought there's no detriment to the public to allow everybody without a disability to use this during gun season. I mean, for goodness sakes, I use a 308. Look at the ballistics on that thing and tell me that this is going to give somebody an unfair advantage as opposed to the rifle that we used in Vietnam, the sniper rifle. It's not. But if you have the weapon at home, and that's the weapon that mom or dad uses, the kid might enjoy it as well during firearm season. So I think that we need to discriminate less in the state, and I think we need to offer more opportunities to people, whatever number of limbs that they have or don't have. And that should help with the problem of a declining hunting population, because otherwise we're going to have to do what Ann Arbor does and start sniping the deer and sterilizing them, paid for by taxpayer dollars.
Representative Eisen has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, some people think you're getting the advantage of that, but crossbow shoots 400 feet per second. Your air pneumatic bow it shoots about the same, a little more, a little less.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, these things are actually slightly a little bit cheaper than the crossbows are. I think my crossbow, it's like...
I just meant for speed-wise, you're not picking up an advantage of your arrow traveling a lot faster.
No, you're looking at the most expensive crossbow on the market versus the most expensive airbow on the market. Maybe 5 to 10% different in speed, but when you're talking about 400 feet per second versus 440 feet per second, that is a negligible difference. And the crossbows keep getting faster and faster and faster every year.
Yes, I know.
And so a really effective method. And
so it doesn't really give you that big of an advantage.
Well, it doesn't give you any advantage. It turns out the deer can't run that fast anyway.
I agree. Thank you.
Representative Sowerby.
Thank you,
Vice
Mr.
Chair
Chairman.
Sowerby.
Thank you, Mr. LaFave, for your testimony. You are persistent. I've heard this from you now for 3 sessions. So isn't it true that originally crossbows were introduced for use in Michigan, I want to say in the early 2000s or late 1990s, with limited use and was primarily provided only for persons with disabilities and limited use, and then I think in the late 2000s it was allowed for everybody to use?
Yeah, it was actually a 3-stage process. It wasn't 1 and 2. It was 1, 2, and 3. I think it was only for people with upper limb disabilities, and then they expanded it to the elderly, and after that they realized, and by they I mean the Natural Resources Commission, who's tasked with using sound science and data by state law to set type of rules, that they should be able to expand it to everybody with no negligible impact on the hunting population. That is their assertion, not mine. I have no comment on that. But that is an accurate representation of the past.
So, and I seem to recall, you use these for hunting on a regular basis, and but it seemed to recall that there was a more significant difference between the velocity of the crossbow versus the airbow that's being recommended here in your legislation, and that within a certain range of that airbow, doesn't it functionally equivalent within a certain range, equivalent to a firearm, and wouldn't that provide really an unfair advantage to those hunters using that airbow during hunting season?
No, and let me explain why. So crossbows and airbows are at less than 500 feet per second. Deer don't run that fast. So It's not as though we can put a heat tracer on this arrow and send it to the deer, and the deer sees it and starts running, and it, gets them. But that's not how any of this works. The speed is, when you're looking at 450 versus 500 feet per second, there's no, the deer, the internal organs of the animal, the mechanics by which hunting is accomplished are not impacted in any meaningful way by that minuscule difference. Now, you're talking about firearms are exponentially quicker. But I will tell you from personal experience that when I use my crossbow to hunt deer because I think it's better for me, let's put it that way. But if you're talking about an airbow versus a crossbow, no, not even a little bit. And the firearm, I can kill a deer at 400 yards with my 308. I'm maxed at 100 with no wind, and I got to send up a prayer before I send that arrow with a crossbow. This airbow will have no difference at any distance between 0 and 100 yards that has any impact on advantages for hunting. If you hit a deer with
So you're assuring us that the velocity difference between a crossbow and the airbow is minuscule, and that should not be a concern for advantages in hunting.
The last time I shot a deer with my crossbow, it was a perfect shot, and the heart exploded into bits and pieces. That deer died the second I pulled that trigger. Yeah, so that's what a crossbow does at about 50 yards at range. Once you explode the heart, there's no more advantage to killing a deer.
That's not my question, Representative Lefebvre. My question is, you're stating that there's very little difference between the velocity of the airbow versus a crossbow.
Yeah, so the killing impact is velocity plus weight. That will be no difference. And the only difference that you could have would potentially be range, but the way that crossbows are designed now, and I don't want to name a product, but I will, somebody that's a Michigan producer, please don't hurt me. The Raven crossbow is incredibly effective. That's what I use. They're getting up at 200 yards now. They're probably more effective at long range than an airbow would be for an accuracy standpoint. So if I wanted to shoot 200 yards, I'd rather use my Raven than use this airbow. But airbow folks can tell me I'm wrong, but that's my opinion.
Yes. Our next question is Representative Ayash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did have a question about the functional difference between an airbow and a crossbow. Can you share a little bit about that, and how is this no different than an airgun?
Say that last part again for me, Representative.
So the functional difference between a crossbow and an airbow. One has strings and whatnot, the other is just pneumatics, correct?
Yeah. So the crossbow uses a tension string, potential energy converted into kinetic energy when you release it. An airbow uses compressed CO2 from a canister that's put into the weapon internally, and then that is released in a burst that converts that potential energy into kinetic energy.
Representative Cambenzi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is my third time with you voting on this bill.
So sorry, Representative.
One of the questions I had from the beginning was, a lot of our UP groups are opposed to this. I don't really have any opposition.
They used to be. They're neutral now.
Groups weighing in, but that was my question. The UP Whitetails of Marquette were the ones, I think, last time that were still opposed. Have you been working with them on addressing any of their solutions, or do we know where they stand with the changes you made?
Well, with all due respect to any organizations that are opposed to the legislation, the fundamental problem is something that Representative Sowerby brought up, is that crossbows were originally designed to help people with disabilities and to end discrimination. And then the Natural Resources Commission decided in their infinite wisdom, to expand that to everybody. But the problem we have in Michigan is that the Natural Resources Commission is unable to allow air bows for people with disabilities because the Michigan Legislature in our statutes has not described this new weapon in any meaningful way to where it could be lawful. To put this into perspective, if that guy behind me right there with the train robbing mask on breaks into my house, I can shoot him with this and kill him and not go to jail. I would never do that, Tom, but please don't break into my house. But I can't go deer hunting with it. So I can use it to kill people, just not deer because it's not defined in NREPA. I would be opposed to the Natural Resources Commission expanding this disability item for people that don't have upper limb disabilities during bow season. I'm opposed to that. I think most people are. But they're using this slippery slope fallacy of what was a mistake, in their opinion, in the past to stop or to perpetuate discrimination against people with disabilities today. And I just think that's an untenable situation. And if anybody's honest with themselves, they would realize that their jealousy of a potential problem in the future should be overridden by the fact that there is an actual problem for people with disabilities that's being perpetuated today that needs to be addressed. And if the NRC decides to expand this to everybody that doesn't have a disability in the future, I'll be right there alongside of them trying to stop it. This is a disability device for bow season and a firearm during firearm season. And I've done the best I could in this statute to draft it, to handcuff the NRC from doing that in the future.
Okay. One quick follow-up.
I guess what I've heard is that it's not that some of them are against helping find a way to make sure people with disabilities can hunt, but just the definition that, who a person with a disability or a physical limitation is broad. And that's, I think, part of the problem that some of them see is that this could include up to 75% of hunters.
No, with all due respect, that's just nonsense. The numbers that I read you earlier today is that there's only 524 people in the state of Michigan that are taking advantage of the exact same language for lower limb disabilities in the state, out of 611,000 applicants. That is just an unfounded fear tactic. It's 0.00087%. It is, what it stems down to is there's a bunch of people who are jealous that somebody's going to be able to use this and is going to shoot their trophy buck that they want. Well, I understand that. I'm a trophy hunter myself. But to stop people with disabilities from having an opportunity to get that is where I start getting jealous for them, because that's not fair, and it should be addressed. And frankly, if you've been hunting for 40 years and have gotten your 40-some chances of getting a deer 90 days out of the year, you ought to be all right with helping somebody who has, frankly, a little bit less privilege than you do be able to get out there and go hunt for more than 20.
Okay. Our last question is from Representative Eisen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Sowerby, I'm gonna just help you out on this one a little bit. The muzzle velocity on that is tremendously different than a firearm. I think that's what you're getting at. Do you have an advantage? Okay, the slowest moving deer rifle is probably about 1,200 feet per second, and this is coming out at 450. So there is no advantage compared to a firearm. So, and as far as the difference between, it's like taking as far as how this thing works, it's like shooting a spitball through a straw or using a slingshot. All right, so if I have a lot of air in me, okay, maybe that spitball goes a little faster, which most of you know I don't have a lot of air in me. And another thing is that a third of the deer killed in Michigan are killed by Chevy trucks and Buicks. Okay, so if this in any way could get less deer killed by cars and trucks, and maybe for the disability to kill, I see only thing good coming from it. So, so thank you. I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Representative. We appreciate your detailed presentation. We've got several persons that are going to testify by Zoom, but we have one more person that's going to be testifying in person, Mr. Bob Jones of the Michigan Bow Hunters. Mr. Jones, welcome.
Thank you. Just a little brief history on Michigan Bow Hunters for those that don't know. We've been around since 1946. For 75 years, in 2020, we celebrated our 75th anniversary. We've been partnered with the DNR and a part of conservation and involved with managing of the natural resources. And we're opposed to this bill. In my 45 years of bow hunting in the state of Michigan, I've certainly seen a lot of technology creep, if you will, into archery season. I opposed a crossbow for general use. I certainly supported it for those with disabilities at the time that it was enacted. Sooner or later, we got to stop the creep into technology. An air bow is a gun. We can stop calling it an air bow. It's a gun. It's classified as a gun, and pneumatic devices are classified currently as guns, and that's what it is. I have the lucky privilege of dealing with a group in my area, Wheeling Team 457, which is a group of about 80 disabled individuals, and I'm fortunate enough I get to take these guys out in the woods turkey hunting. I get to take them out to the stands deer hunting. And I talked to the president of that organization. His name is Ray Brown, and I asked him, I said, Ray, is this something that you guys really are after? And they had the opportunity. They went up to Randy's gun shop, which is up in Bad Axe, and they were able to fire the air bow. And his comments to me after that were that a crossbow is a much better tool for them. That it's more adaptable. It's lighter. Senator Lefebvre, I appreciate you bringing a crossbow here for us to look at, but there couldn't be anything more antiquated than what you brought and harder to use. I agree that someone with disabilities could not use that. It would be an impossible task to draw. The truth is, though, there's many the Raven that you use. There's many adaptable features for that. He talked about the crank, and that can be cumbersome. There's battery-operated tools for cocking. There's pneumatic cocking mechanisms, bipods and tripods to help support the bow when you're using it. To allow a firearm into archery season is just a bad mistake. And currently, there's already, I believe it's either Remington or Ruger has a air gun that's shooting a bolt with a .22 rimfire cartridge. Are we going to be here next year defending against a rimfire cartridge because it's very similar to the air bow, other than using compressed air? It uses a powder cartridge. I think we need to stop the creep into the season. You know, archery season was meant to be challenging. Well, you know, in the original archery season, our first archery season in 1936, we were granted the long season we were because of the low impact on the resource. That's going to be coming up into question, I think, at some point in time in the future, the length of our season, because the number of deer that are killed with archery equipment today. And that needs to be considered when we start looking at the technology moving forward and what we call a bow. Sorry, I'm a little nervous and lost my train of thought there, but I certainly have no issues with trying to help those with disabilities get out into the season, or to be able to get out and hunt. And they have an early season that even allows those with disabilities to hunt with firearms during the current archery season. They don't have to wait till firearms season to get out in the woods and even hunt with a firearm. Got notes everywhere. I had a big sheet at my house, but unfortunately it's still on my counter. You guys were talking about the places that were in favor and not in favor of this. I'm here with them Michigan bow hunters, but I can tell you this this legislation has lit a fire underneath many of the other bow hunting organizations in this state, and the 4 largest bow hunting and archery organizations in this state are opposed to this. Michigan Bow Hunters, the Michigan Traditional Bow Hunters, the Michigan Longbow Association, and the Michigan Archers Association have all drafted letters and sent them. Hopefully, some of you committee members got those that are opposed to this. Law enforcement, I had a call from law enforcement from the DNR. They're opposed to this legislation.
They'll be testifying shortly.
Okay. I spent quite a bit of time on the phone with the gentleman.
We've got a long agenda today, so we do need to move it along unless there's any
I
remaining
guess I covered
points.
all my talking points, but please consider the future of bow hunting. Bow hunting in Michigan, we're only the 2nd state in the nation that actually had a separate bow season, and tradition means a lot, and we need to keep that in mind moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. We appreciate your testimony.
Any questions?
Oh, I'm sorry. I do have 2 questions. Representative LaFave?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. For the benefit of the record, the early season that you speak of is 4 days. It's 4 days for people with disabilities to use a weapon compared to the 90 days that people can with bow hunting. I don't think that is a fair comparison. But, sir, what are the percentage of deer that are harvested with bows and crossbows compared to firearms in the state of Michigan right now?
I believe it's about a 60-40 split right now.
And what percentage of hunters out of the general population are using bows and crossbows?
Out of the overall tags sold, I don't know currently. I'd have to look at the latest stats on that. But when the crossbow was introduced, part of the hope for that was that it was going to expand and get more hunters in the woods. And what happened with that, we still have a decline in hunters, but we've had a lot of hunters that switched from gun season into bow season. Our numbers have been continued to decline while archery season has gone up, and some of the gun hunting has gone down. But they're not necessarily new hunters; they're just hunters that switch seasons.
I would like to say, Mr. Chairman, that pneumatic guns are defined under Michigan state law as a weapon using compressed air to shoot a bullet. Bullets are not bullets. That's why we need to do this bill. And with respect to your airbow situation using a 22, Michigan state law defines any weapon that uses an explosion is a firearm. And so if you wanted to take this ridiculous hypothetical situation of using this 22 to fire an airbow, the law would need to change, and it would need to come back to this committee to do it.
Is there a question there?
I got a lot of questions, Mr. Chair. I'll yield.
Thank you. And the last question again is from Mr. Eisen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question was the definition of a firearm, and I think Rep. LaFave covered that. And so thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate your testimony, Mr. Jones.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for taking the time to come down. Okay, we have several individuals from the DNR that are going to testify, all by Zoom. We have Craig Burnett, as you know, the legislative liaison, Lieutenant Tom Wanless of the Law Enforcement Division, and Lieutenant Jason Wickland, also of the Law Enforcement Division. So, take it away, gentlemen. We're eager to hear from the DNR's point of view.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the ability to testify remote again this week. As you mentioned, with me are Lieutenant Wanless and Lieutenant Wickland from our Law Enforcement Division. Is our Law Enforcement Division that typically reviews weapon types such as the one that's mentioned this legislation. The administration is officially opposed to House Bill 4080. It's the same as we were last time to the similar legislation that Representative LaFave worked on. Two key points, I'll be brief because I believe we're running short on time here, is we don't feel, with the nomadic gun, it just does not closely align to archery We feel it's a firearm, and so we oppose the ability to move this into an archery only season. Then the other major concern with the legislation is changes to the hunt from a standing vehicle permit. The current law has clear standards. The new language has a little bit vagueness. We're concerned on whether that's going to be applied consistently across the state. Again, very brief. Those are our high points, and Lieutenant Wanless and Lieutenant Wickland will be happy to try to answer any technical questions.
Okay. Do they want to testify, or they just want to respond to questions?
They're just going to be available for questions.
Very good. Representative Lefebvre.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And now that the department has brought that up, I will not be violating the agreement that I made with the prior administration. Let's talk about the hunt from a standing vehicle permit. When I was 9 years old, 2 DNR officers walked into my house unannounced at 9 in the morning when I applied for a hunt for a standing vehicle permit. I was hopping around the house with no leg on, and the DNR officers said, and I quote, "You look good enough to hunt to us. Hunt from a standing vehicle permit denied," to a person that has one knee. And so I told the department about that situation when Governor Snyder was in office. And the department agreed that they would not have any problems with the changes to the hunting from a standing vehicle permit, so long as I never told that story to this committee. So, the changes to the hunting from a standing vehicle permit were made because the department under the previous administration realized how absurd the language was, open for debate among officers, and this language clarifies that it is a much more reasonable, applicable standard that is not based on officer discretion, as was abused in my personal situation, and based on the note of a doctor. So, to end discrimination for people with lower limb disabilities and power-hungry DNR officer that at least came into my home, that's why we made the changes.
Are there any other questions from committee members? Well, thank you very much for appearing, gentlemen. We appreciate your availability. And we'll go on to the next witness. We have one remaining witness, again by Zoom, Mr. Chris Turek. If he's on Zoom. There he is. Welcome, sir. You may proceed.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having me and members of the committee. My name is Chris Turk from Traverse City, Michigan. I'm a U.S. Army veteran, Michigan deer hunter, Michigan hunter, and passionate airgun hunting advocate. I'm here today to express my support of this bill and provide some technical background. Quite honestly, I had a lot of talking points kind of prepared, but actually from the testimony of Mr. Jones, I actually would like to use this opportunity to provide actually quite a bit of clarification. I would also like to invite Mr. Jones to join me sometime out on the range. I too am also an archery hunter, and I absolutely understand the amount of time and effort, practice, and passion it takes to be proficient with archery equipment. I think some of the hang-up that is happening within the community of archers is really, it's on semantics. It's on the vernacular that's being used. And I've actually even heard during this testimony today, unfortunately on both sides of this argument, actually talking about things in incorrect terms. To kind of add to what Representative Lefebvre was talking about, the actual range of velocity that an air gun, and I will say air gun, I will not say air bow because these are not bows. As an air gunner myself and any air gunner that I know, we do not consider ourselves archers when we fire a arrow or bolt from an air gun. These will fly anywhere from between 250 to 550 feet per second through a whole wide range of airgun technologies. It's an entire family of technology within the airgun industry. When you bring into this idea of being able to use a .22 long rifle firearm cartridge, you're talking about something that's completely outside of the scope of what we're talking about, and it has absolutely no bearing on this conversation whatsoever. So when you look at that range of 250 to 550 feet per second with one of these, it is exactly the same as we find in the archery sector. So this is my BowTech bow, carbon fiber, about 3.5 pounds. Mr. Jones brought up a topic about how air guns or air bows, which I will not call them, are extremely heavy. There are air guns within our sector that are around only 4 pounds, only a little bit heavier than this, and on average are about 7 pounds to shoulder. One of the hangups that I've heard a lot of the archery folks talk about, and really it kind of stems from their hate for crossbows even, is about pulling a trigger. That if you're pulling a trigger somehow that you are cheating and that your heritage as a hunter is basically being diminished. Well, I'd like to contest, as an archery hunter myself, being able to harvest a deer this year myself, I would say the vast majority of bow hunters that I know that are using compound bite-based bows, I'm going to throw a number out there. I'm going to just say vast majority are using a trigger-based device. So when you're pulling a trigger on an air gun, or you're pulling a trigger on a crossbow, or you're pulling a trigger on a vertical bow like a compound bow, basically what we have left is we have a standing argument with traditional bow hunters. They're still using stick and string. And I understand that passion and the commitment it takes from them to become proficient at their sport. But this takes absolutely nothing away from that. Like Representative Lefebvre said, this will probably only affect maybe 500 to 1,000 additional disabled hunters to get into the woods. And so if we're getting it right down to the brass tacks of like velocity, exactly the same. If it's about pulling a trigger, exactly the same, exactly the same. So what this is about really, if we can get past the technology and the ballistics and the terminal ballistics of the projectile, because when this hits this deer, it does not care if it was fired by a string, a puff of air, or unicorn flatulence. It does not matter. It does not matter. It all has the same ballistic, external ballistics to when it impacts that deer. So what this comes down to is access, okay? As a veteran myself, I'm an able-bodied veteran, thank God. But I wear a bracelet for a friend who got hit by a roadside bomb who did not make it back. So we have hundreds, if not thousands, of disabled veterans here in the state of Michigan that could qualify to be able to hunt between October 1st and November 15th, which we all know as hunters. To all my friends and brothers and sisters over on the archery side of the deer hunting equation, we all know that's the best time to hunt. That's the best time to get the biggest buck. It's not snowing yet. My uncle is over 70 years old. He doesn't want to go hunting once it gets into December, and I get that. And when I turn 70, I probably won't want to either. So this bill opens up access. And if we can get past this whole nonsense about the technical discussion and argument of what it is and what it isn't, yes, it looks like a firearm. Yes, it looks like a gun, but it's not. The ballistics are exactly the same. And if you want to talk about heritage, yes, bow hunting in the last 50 or so years and here in Michigan, there is deep heritage. The reason why I'm an air gunner is in the early 1800s, Lewis and Clark, you know what they took with them as they made their exploration across the United States? An air gun. That is why I believe there's just as much as American heritage in air gunning as there is in archery. There is not a monopoly on that heritage. And so thank you for your time, and I'm here for any technical questions.
Thank you, Mr. Turek. Are there any questions from committee members? I, for one, appreciate your concern about those of us over 70. So thank you for your testimony. I do have a number of cards to read in from persons that do not wish to testify. Mr. Ken Buckholz is in support of the bill. Mr. Brent Simpson of the Airguns of Michigan is in support. Mr. Tony Eisenmaker is a support. Mitch King of Airgun Sporting Association of Helena, Montana is in support. Val Gamerman of Pyramid Air is in support. Dean and Ellen Hall of East Point, Michigan are opposed. Dave and Linda Lucas of Black River are opposed. And Dale Hendershot of the Michigan Trappers and Predator Callers Association is opposed. So that concludes the testimony on this particular bill. We appreciate everybody's involvement.